The last thing I noticed about New Zealand drove me absolutely crazy. Salut YouTube! I was just thinking to myself how funny it is that when you're living overseas in a new country, you kind of have an outsider's view of what's going on and you're able to observe other people and pick up on all the cultural nuances. But something I didn't really expect is that it would go the other way as well. So the first big culture shock I had as someone who's been living in France and goes back home to New Zealand is of course around the food. In France, I have a canteen at my work, and at the canteen I take big hot meals, duck, chicken, vegetables, rice, couscous. We really have filling big meals at lunchtime, and it sees us through all the way to dinner. And in New Zealand, we were having tiny little sandwiches, and people would just eat the sandwich and be like, okay, cool, had a bit of lunch, let's go. And I was like, what? Like, I'm still hungry. And it makes you want to snack in the afternoons. In the afternoon, we stopped for a bit of cake and a coffee, or, you know, I often found myself needing something to get me through the afternoons. In terms of where you eat as well, I noticed that, you know, people can eat dinner way more casual settings. Like, a lot of people like eat dinner on the couch, just using the coffee table as a place to put your drinks or your plate or whatever. They're not actually sitting up formally at a dinner table to dine every night like we do here in France. Another point on the food is that we like our junk food in New Zealand. Like, people really use food as a treat. I mean, chocolate biscuits or sweets, lollies, or to snack on. Again, either in the afternoon, have a chocolate bar, or even after dinner, there's like, okay, it's after dinner, let's have some ice cream, or let's have, you know, you'll be sitting in front of the TV and you'll have a few biscuits or something like this. There's a lot of snacking that goes on, which isn't really in the culture here in France, I have to say, because I think as well you're satisfied from your full meals at lunch and dinner. You don't really need to keep snacking. The second thing I had on my list was about the housing market. My gosh, if I had $1 for every time a New Zealander said the housing market, I'd be a very wealthy woman. People in New Zealand are obsessed with owning their own home, and ideally 2, 3, 4 homes. I think it's because in New Zealand that's been a way that a lot of people have made a lot of money. And I guess because the housing market has been growing and doing really well, it's really seen as a very, very safe investment. We've actually got a saying in New Zealand, which is, it's as safe as houses, you know, in terms of money. Oh, it's as safe as houses. You're not going to lose anything. It's just such a big deal in New Zealand, owning your own home. A lot of people my age have already purchased properties. Like, people are talking about it all the time, and they're questioning you a lot. Like, have you bought a place in Paris? Yeah, definitely just going to go out and buy a place in Paris. But, you know, it's like, when are you buying a house? You've got to get on the property ladder. It's a very, very, very important life milestone in New Zealand, and to be honest, I got a little bit sick of talking about it. Kind of linked to people asking you questions about when are you buying your house and everything like this, people like to ask you questions as well about general life milestones. I guess in my kind of age range, in my late 20s, people are curious, it's natural, but they're asking me like, oh, are you guys going to get married? Are you going to have kids? Do you want kids? How many kids do you think you want? And this kind of thing. And I kind of, it reminds me of small town syndrome a little bit, like where people are kind of curious about what everyone's up to, about everyone else's business, you know? And I feel like in France you have to be really, really close with the person to ask these kinds of questions. I think there's definitely, it's a bit of a social faux pas, like it's to dig into people's privacy in that way and to ask them these very personal questions. It's just not really well seen to do something like that. Whereas in New Zealand, you're an open game. Anyone, your friend's mum, your friend's auntie, the second cousin of your grandmother, they'll be asking you for the details. Like, when are you getting married? When are you going to have kids? When's the family? When are you buying that house? People are curious. They want to kind of maybe live through you sometimes, especially the older generation. And it's just kind of part of the game. But it's something that I noticed, and I haven't had to talk about those things or answer those kind of questions for quite a long time. I also noticed that the way people live in New Zealand is really different to what we're used to over here in Europe. I mean, I'm looking at people our age in Paris and London. I mean, we're lucky if we're living in a couple with 2 really good jobs in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's a luxury. Whereas in New Zealand, people have so much space. And it kind of shocked me to see that couples in their late 20s, they're renting or owning 3-bedroom homes with big gardens and garages for the car. And it's just a different scale of space and size. When I showed photos of my little 22 square meter apartment that I was sharing in a couple, in a relationship for 2.5 years, people were just like, I mean, seriously, how did you not kill each other? Like, how is it possible for 2 human beings to live in such a small space? They just couldn't understand it. The other big culture shock is definitely about the way we dress. My gosh. We can look like absolute slobs. I'm sorry to my fellow New Zealanders. My gosh, I mean, people go out barefoot, jandals, track pants, hoodies, like they'll go to the supermarket in their pajamas, like they honestly don't care. And it's really nice that they can not care because, I mean, people aren't really judging them and they can, you know, they're comfortable and they feel good. But sometimes, I mean, I just had the culture shock, the reverse culture shock of like, whoa, people can look pretty rough. I mean, pretty like, yeah, pretty casual. In New Zealand, I actually saw a guy like in his dressing gown, barefoot, walking down to the dairy, to the corner store to pick up some milk. I mean, and this is just, that's totally okay. And that's cool. I mean, I like that and I really miss that. The last thing I noticed about New Zealand drove me absolutely crazy, and it's a phenomenon that I like to call the sleep police. I feel like in France it's okay to sleep. It's well seen to have a good night's sleep. Sleep is a very important part of your life hygiene. I'm not a morning person and I prefer to sleep in a little bit in the mornings, especially when I'm on holiday, but God forbid if I should sleep till 9:30 in the morning. I'll get so many comments about it and jokes made about it. I would get up at 9:30 a.m. and they'd be like, good afternoon, ho 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 ho. Like, they're just relentless. Like you it's like naughty to sleep in New Zealand. I find I got so many comments from my family members, from friends, like, wow, you sleep a lot. And I mean, there's definitely a thing in the culture like where they're up at 5-6 a.m., you know, going to the gym before work and stuff, and that's fine. Like, live your life. It's really funny. It's almost like there's an association with laziness and the amount of hours you need to sleep or something. It's like, you know, when I'm up, I like to consider myself as a relatively well put together and productive person, but it doesn't seem to count. It's like if I get up late, I'm a lazy slob. I don't know. There's definitely something that really annoyed me about going home and feeling like everyone was on my back about how much I slept. Like, just leave me alone. I'll get up when I want to. I'm on holiday. Sleep is life. Cool, guys, so that's all of the reverse culture shocks that I had for you today. Have you guys experienced something similar? Have you ever gone away from your own country and then come back and been like, oh, that's kind of weird? If so, let me know down below. I love learning about other cultures, other countries. As always, if you have any questions about New Zealand in particular or the New Zealand culture, just let me know down in the comments below and I'll try and get back to you. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Avianto!
And though I close my